So Shannon, I want to step over and ask you, it's really difficult building a business. I've built many, and I've often said I have more in common with entrepreneurs from Nairobi and Sao Paulo and Tayendanega than I do the people I grew up with in high school. The journey is the journey, but some people's journeys are far more difficult. And you've dedicated yourself to breaking those barriers in advance so that we have a real inclusive and sustainable economy. Can you share some success stories and strategies that the audience can take and learn from in the future?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the question, but I just want to say that I love the circle of care. I think if there's one takeaway that I put down today, I love these conversations because I always take as much away as learning as well. So thank you for that. And, Barry, you're right. Like when we take a look at the distribution of small, medium-sized enterprises across the country, we know that Indigenous entrepreneurship, this is not the absence or the underrepresentation of it is not a new phenomenon. And it's, often I will say that Indigenous entrepreneurs don't lack skills. It's the opportunity that we lack, and having an equal playing ground to be working in. And there's a few things that I want to point out. Funding, obviously, we talk about access to capital being incredibly important. And two things that I'd really love to see change. First of all, really continue to put a focus on microloans, particularly for Indigenous women entrepreneurs. We underestimate the importance of micro businesses and how these can grow into big businesses. But in many cases, we can see that Indigenous women entrepreneurs, and it was CCAB research that with the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub that found that Indigenous women are really bringing more of the traditional knowledge, that cultural expression, into the business. This is a huge part of reclaiming our cultures, reclaiming our language, reclaiming our Indigenous ways of knowing. So there's a huge, huge role that Indigenous women entrepreneurs are playing. And I think when I look at the microloans, I'm working with one of the Aboriginal financial institutions out of Alberta right now, and I'm on one of NACA's members on an Indigenous women's microloan. And we've got case studies already of Indigenous women who came in for small loans and who are now going into more traditional loans from the AFI because they've been given that opportunity. Part of the challenge is the way that the financial system assesses businesses. And it's against this notion of what we'll call the 5 C's of credit. I'm not going to go dive deep into that, but it doesn't fit with it doesn't support a lot of it. Well, no, it creates a huge barrier. And I'm going to be more to the point than that. Most Indigenous businesses don't fit the 5 C's criteria, which makes it very difficult. So we don't often will have the collateral. We won't have the capacity. We don't have the intergenerational wealth that's going to allow us to put money into capital that we need into the business. So the system as it is not working. So the microloan that NACA is doing is absolutely changing the game. But also I look at, you mentioned the global Indigenous ecosystem. I think about an organization out of New Mexico, it's Native Women Leads, and their 5 C's, they've completely wiped it out, and they've replaced it with something called the 5 R's, which is looking at founders and funding them based on a whole different set of criteria of relational. Is the business rooted? Is it restorative, regenerative, and revolutionary? They're wiping out the 5 C's. It's very much relationship focused lending. And we also, when we take a look, again, the importance of, I guess, financial institutions that are built for our communities, they work because we're in the community. We understand that lived experience. We understand the challenges. So I would say that the finance sector really, there's such an opportunity for us to be looking at, like, do we give as corporations 1% to Indigenous entrepreneurship? What would a new loan look like? What would a new pool of funding look like? How do we increase the equity funding for these organizations, as well? Like, how do we get more money into the hands of Indigenous entrepreneurs? The opportunity is not missing, but the access to capital, we don't even have enough capital to be deployed to meet the opportunity. So that's a huge gap right there. So the whole financial system could say, what is our role in this economic reconciliation? A lot of these big banks that are making big profits, how do we give back? How do we start looking at that as economic reconciliation? So But again, on the funding side, and I think you said it, Barry, like, you fall down 7 times, or I don't know what your analogy was there, but I think about Bobby Reset, who's an Alberta-based Indigenous women entrepreneurs, 170 no's from looking for funding for her business, and talk about getting back up. And every time she just, she says that she just kept getting stronger. So I'd really love to see like a lot of change in the financial sector. And again, this accessing new markets, I can think about, when you ask me about success stories, I think about an Indigenous mother who didn't want to go back into the traditional workforce when she had her kids. So she started making her own jewelry. Today, she's got a company called Native Diva Creations. She's been featured at New York Fashion Show. Now, I think in September, she was in Paris. Like, models are wearing her pieces, but it's also infusing our Indigenous culture and teaching along the way. So there's so much to say in all of this, but also I want to say too that we really challenge ourselves in the business community to think about, how do we define entrepreneurship and the stereotypes that we have associated with it. A lot of Indigenous entrepreneurs don't even associate with the word entrepreneur. It's not the way that they would define themselves. So thinking about, is that the right word? And also to say, who is defining what a business journey should be? We have this ecosystem of support, but not all entrepreneurs are at the same life cycle in their business. They don't all have the same goals in their business. So it's looking at how we define business success. And is it always through growth and profit and size that should be the metric? I would argue that no, it shouldn't be. There's a whole Indigenous economy that's going to thrive based on a very diverse business landscape.
I completely agree. And in fact, the notion of viewing the 5 C's, it's all based on profit. It's based on revenue. It's not based on broader impact. And, I've always hated the term small business and how it basically is so derogatory, or the mom and pop shop. And I'm sorry, a single mother who has built a business and is sustaining her family on 40 or 30 or 50 or $70,000, that should be highlighted. We should be admiring that. We should be supporting that, because those contributions are what are going to allow other young women to see as being opportunities for them and pathways for them. And we need to really redefine entrepreneurship, not just from an Indigenous standpoint. I think collectively, there's a reason why the visible majority is 80% made up from those groups. You're going to say something, Shannon. Sorry.
Yeah. And, I just wanted to say too, like, I've worked with so many Indigenous women who didn't intend to be entrepreneurs. It was sort of this accidental career path. It turns out to be a beautiful path for them. And they're like, wow, now that I'm in it, I can see the opportunity in this. And, and I think about, we work with at the Finance Cafe, we've got financial literacy that's designed specifically for Indigenous women. But we start with, why does this business matter to you? Like, what are the goals? You've got community goals here. We've got family goals. It's not just about, and what I realize, the more that I work with Indigenous women, profit is not the end motivator in this. And so we have to think back to say, like, why have that's how we've defined it today in terms of being successful in business. But a lot of women I work with did not intend to be entrepreneurs. And now when you start to work with their goals, then you can start elevating their goals to they didn't realize that was attainable for them. They got to a certain place. And now it's also sometimes just helping to say, okay, what's next for you? But really just going back to, why does this business matter so much to you? And I think that's a question we need to start asking a little bit more in our financial communities.
I completely agree. And as Western society starts to talk about impact investing, I feel like this is something that the Indigenous economy has always understood. And this is, again, why I think, maybe stopping and listening and redefining is going to be absolutely critical.